Well, good morning, one and all, and welcome to the last Elevenses of 2020. It's kind of traditional to end the year like this with a review of the previous 12 months, and it's kind of even more applicable this year, not just because we've had a very odd year, that would be an understatement, but also because, of course, there's nothing much happening in the news at this time of year, so there's nothing much to talk about, really. So let's go back and have a look at the events of the previous year. January, let's go all the way back to January. There we go. Set that up for you. Look at that. We've even got graphics. Well, the year started promisingly enough as we moved into a new decade, and back on January the 3rd, I wrote that we were on the cusp of a revolution in motorised transport. And what I actually said was the last 4 or 5 years have seen huge steps forward in the design and performance of electric motorcycles, and the move away from the petrol-powered internal combustion engines that have pushed us forward for the last 100 years will only accelerate. The push is coming from cities, making it more expensive to operate ICE vehicles on the one side, and from the industry itself on the other. Right now, I said, the zero range is almost practical, almost affordable as an alternative for most riders. I pointed out that so far mainstream manufacturers had pretty much avoided tackling the electric motorcycle issue, with just a few scooters and, of course, the Harley-Davidson Livewire appearing. But I did speculate that more of both kinds of motorcycle would be appearing in increasing numbers over the next few years, and indeed that's what began to happen this year. The Japanese names are still mostly noticeable by their absence, Kawasaki being a bit of an exception there because they have at least shown some interest in producing a proper electric motorcycle, and there is some talk of a hybrid too. But other recognised bike manufacturers are starting to fill the void. In the last couple of weeks, I've talked about new electric PTWs from Riehu, the Spanish company, and 127 mile per hour Kymco electric motorcycle that are both going into production. I also continued my long-running Better Biking series of tips here on Facebook. On January the 4th, I started a new series of Skills on Saturday series, which started with 4 New Year's resolutions that will be easy for riders to fulfill in the coming year. The first was to schedule some training. That's still a good tip. Even now, we just have to be a little bit more creative as to how we do that. The new Tips on Tuesday series was 5 tips for cool commuters, and that turned out to be somewhat prescient given the events of the next few months. Also in January, I published a short 52-page paperback entitled The Science of Being Seen, which closely follows the presentation of the same name. The idea is that it really acts as an aid memoir to the presentation itself. And the idea is that as I update the presentation, as new information comes in, so the book can also be quickly updated. The month concluded with news that Norton had folded and that Triumph and Bajaj motorcycles from India had signed a deal. The Norton story would rumble on for some months, but we're still waiting to see any kind of output from Triumph. And so that takes us into the month of February. Now, February's Tips on Tuesday series covered some motorcycling myths. Some many people agreed with. A couple got some interesting feedback from people who didn't necessarily agree with what I was saying. In Scotland, Transport Scotland announced that they were funding yet another bike safety study. Since February, I've covered the results of at least 2 more bike safety studies in my show and on my Facebook page. And the question I have to ask myself is, how many more do we need before we start acting on them? I also announced I was opening up a new training location in Stevenage to go with my existing start points in Buckinghamshire, Essex, Kent, and Surrey. That didn't go according to plan due to the events of the following month. On Wednesday, February 11th, I was very pleased to be able to welcome Brittany Morrow and her partner David along to one of our courses at the Kent Fire and Rescue Road Safety Experience in Rochester. It turned out to be the last Biker Down course that we ran this year. Now, Brittany was in the UK to present awards at the end of the Women's Riders World Relay, get that out correctly. And that was basically a marathon round the world motorcycling event, which concluded in London. And she was due to make an appearance at the Bike Shed and also at the MCN Bike Show in London. Now, I met Brittany in New Zealand on the Shiny Side Up tour that we both were speakers on back in 2018, and again met up with her over there in 2019. And it was a great opportunity to bring Brittany up to see what we do in Kent with Biker Down. Now, you probably know Biker Down has gone pretty much UK wide, which is good. And I've obviously taken my chunk of it off to New Zealand to present out there. So yeah, what we did was we picked Brittany up from central London and took her out of town via a bit of a scenic route, see something of the sights of southeast London. There aren't many, but we fitted in what we could. We stopped at Brands Hatch for a photo opportunity and just a quick look at the circuit from the trackside. And when we got to Rochester itself, we were there in time for a sort of a mid-afternoon meal and a quick walk around the rather quaint town centre there. Before we headed off up to Biker Down, and Brittany and David were able to sit through the whole 3.5 hour presentation. Brittany also added a few words at the end, complimenting us all on what we were doing, which was really nice. And then we had a quick pint of beer, something David was rather keen on, and then drove back to their hotel. So, as I wrote at the time, Biker Down and Shiny Side Up demonstrate just how motorcyclists can come together to promote rider safety. My feeling is that for far too long, rider safety has been imposed top down. Somebody else told us what works and what doesn't, and we've been talked down to on bike safety. And much of this is not just unpalatable, in my opinion. It doesn't actually work. We can see that from the fact that accidents haven't changed in the last 50 years. Shiny Side Up, Biker Down here in the UK, and my own Science of Being Seen program, Brittany's work in the USA on protective clothing and why people should wear it, all take a very, very different approach to that. We are bikers. We are presenting to you a message which comes from us as motorcyclists. And our message is across the board that our responsibility lies in our hands. It's our task to keep ourselves safe and not to rely on somebody else's. Having seen Brittany and David back off to New Mexico, a day or two later, I was actually flying out to the US myself with my partner Judy for 2 weeks in California, having some R&R with my brother and his family in Los Angeles. There was a good reason for that, a health crisis last year, just after we left, so we were very keen to see them. Anyway, we had a good time out there. We also made a trip up to a town called Merced, which is about 300 miles north of LA. And for that trip, we borrowed my brother's Audi hybrid. Now, that trip up to see Judy's cousin was the very first time I'd actually driven a hybrid, and boy, was I impressed with that Audi during the 1,000 miles or so we had it. Every time we hit city traffic, we switched to the electric motor. The vehicle charges itself, obviously enough, and one of the things we were found very quickly able to do was actually run up a hill on the electric motor, most of it anyway, and then use the downhill stretch to recharge the battery. It was only really on the long runs on the flat where we actually needed the petrol engine, where of course the petrol engine is most efficient. So the result was we got just over 50 miles to a US gallon out of the car, which is around about 60 mpg in UK terms. Nice to haul a proper five-seater car. This isn't a small vehicle. It's actually a full-sized, well, it's a compact in Americans' terms, but it's a sort of fairly full-sized car that you buy in England. And it's that fuel consumption is better than my motorcycles can achieve. We also borrowed their fully electric Fiat 500, which doesn't have a long range before it runs out, but it's perfectly adequate for getting around in town. It's zippy, it's nimble, and it was fun. We used it to get up to the Griffith Observatory, which unfortunately was shut for the day, but we saw the obligatory sight of the Hollywood sign. We also took my brother's bikes out for a day. We went off to the Palisades range, which is just to the north and northwest of LA. And I borrowed his NC 750X, and he took his WR250, although of course we did swap bikes out on the road. And I have to say I was seriously impressed with both bikes. It's the first time I've ridden a WR. It's light, flickable, fun, and it's capable off-road. Well, it's certainly more capable than I am, so that's good. If it has any weaknesses, it's a bit short of speed for freeway use, so he tends to carry a different front sprocket and swap them over, depending on what riding he's doing. And the range on the standard tank is also minimalistic, which doesn't really work well when you're sort of 100 miles to the nearest fuel station, so he's fitted a long-range tank to solve that problem. I spent most of my time on the 750 though, and I have to say it's a distinct improvement over the original 700. Now that was a bike I liked, but decided it had too many flaws to be considered as an instructor bike. The 750 has many revisions over the original 700, and I have to say it also revised my idea of the bike, so it's back on the list. Look out for a rerun of my review in my new newsletter, which I'll tell you more about at the end of the show. While we were out there during our ride around the canyons, we stopped at a location which overlooked the set for the TV show MASH. Unfortunately, it's been damaged by wildfires. And we also stopped for lunch in a historic bar, which was frequented by the Hollywood stars of the 20s and 30s. And sadly, I learned that burned down this autumn in the wildfires too. So yeah, we spent 2 weeks out in the US, and while we were there, it was evident that concern over coronavirus was starting to rise. And it was noticeable when we boarded the return flight that it was only about 2/3 full. The outward flight had been full almost capacity. Okay, so that takes us to March. Where's March? There it is. So back home, and it was cool and damp. Garden was a complete bog, but I got ready to relaunch my training for the new season. I also happened to be running a new Focus on Friday series, which I asked how dangerous is motorcycling. But within 2 weeks, it was pretty clear that it wasn't the big danger of the summer biking. It was in fact likely that our summer of motorcycling was actually already in doubt. By Saturday 14th, I was writing the first of what was to become a series of coronavirus updates. Whilst I decided to continue taking bookings on a short-term basis, this is what I said. As a trainer, I have a duty of care to my customers, and while I think it's important not to overreact, at the same time, I do believe we all need to be prepared for rapid changes in the situation. One prospective customer at this point told me in no uncertain terms that I was overreacting, but I suppose my science background was examining what was going on here and predicting that the virus would continue to spread in the UK. But I don't think even I was expecting how quickly the situation would change. By Wednesday, the 18th of March, I was already saying that I had decided to suspend all face-to-face training on Wednesday, 25th of March. And I cancelled the 2 courses that I'd booked in for the end of that week and the following week. One trainee was understanding, the other, I have to say, was rather less so. But in the event, we didn't actually get that far. We went into lockdown, of course, on March 23rd. Now, rather than twiddle my thumbs at home, I learned how to live stream on Facebook in 24 hours flat. I put up a little studio in the corner of the room at home, which I'm still using, as you'll see. And on Wednesday, the 25th, I launched my new Elevenses webcast, which you are watching today. I was little expecting, I have to say, to be here and still delivering it 9 months later. And that takes us into April. Now, what happened in April? Well, the answer is not a lot. There wasn't much newsworthy, apart from a slew of cancelled events through the month of April. The cost of crude oil went negative for a while. In other words, they were paying you to take the oil away because basically storage facilities were full to the brim before production could be slowed. Super Socco offered key workers a 10% discount on their lightweight electric motorcycles. And Oxfordshire County Council released a blatantly anti-motorcycle transport plan. Plus, there were more revelations from Norton, which concluded that with the news that the carcass of this once proud British company had been sold to TVS Motors in India. As most of us were locked down and off the bikes, I started a series on Elevenses on keeping biking fit, which basically gave you a series of exercises to work through. I also used my newfound live presentation skills to deliver several online presentations. That's something that the super fast broadband has made possible, plus my nearly new and much more powerful laptop, which is capable of streaming HD video. My presentations, incidentally, is still available to any groups or clubs who want to book me up. Just drop me a line, and I'm more than happy to organise a show for you online, doing something about, well, any of my standard presentations, or talk about anything you like, really. I also opened a new account at www.coffee.com and started putting up my old Facebook posts online. Now, it's pretty obvious that with my regular training suspended, so would be my income. So to help pay the bills, what I did was put the old posts up for subscribers. So for the cost of a coffee, you get 30 days access. My regular Tips on Tuesday and Skills on Saturday series go back to 2014. So basically, there's a lot of writing, 100 posts a year. £3 for 100 better biking tips. Well, I would say it's a bargain because it's less than a quarter of the cost of a month's subscription to Motorcycle News. If there's one good feature of the lockdown, the early months, it was the sudden change in the weather. After a couple of damp days, the weather turned fine and dry and carried on right through April, May and June. And we had some of the best spring weather for years. I would have loved to have been out riding in it, but at least if I couldn't be riding, I could in fact admire the crystal clear air over London. And if I couldn't be riding, at least we could get on with planting some vegetables as the garden rapidly dried out in this wonderful weather. By May, some riders were starting to get itchy throttle hands. One pair were fined for riding 200 miles across the country to get fish and chips on a Yorkshire seaside town. And big groups of riders were also being dispersed in the Matlock Bath area and also in Wales. We also began to hear about a scheme to bring forward a trial of e-scooters in some towns and cities. Now, these things obviously were previously illegal. They're still illegal unless they are from a rental company, but the e-scooter trials are going on now across the country in a number of different towns. And something else that came forward were plans to run top-class motorcycle racing behind closed doors, which gave us something to look forward to. There were also encouraging signs that small bike sales were on the up as more people were returning to work as the toughest lockdown measures were eased. So I quickly put together a new series looking at biking basics for new riders to cater for those who are switching to a powered two-wheeler and avoiding public transport. Mid-month, I cut Elevenses back from 4 shows a week to just Wednesdays and Sundays. And for those of us still stuck at home, I started a new series on riding after lockdown and how to regain rusty skills. Now, as we have got towards the end of the month of May, it was pretty clear that we were going to be coming out of lockdown fairly soon. So I put together a COVID-friendly approach to my bike courses that basically allowed me to follow the guidance to make every reasonable effort to work from home as a first option. And to achieve that, I decided what was needed was to have theory sessions being presented online before each session, to have a pre-ride video briefing. That's something I normally do, where I explain the radio and how I'm going to give directions and that kind of thing, what to do if we get separated. That could all go online into a video. And then, having concluded the on-road training, I would actually video the ride, and I would use that video to produce a video debrief, basically, with stills and video footage from the rider. And basically what that allowed me to do was do away with a sort of 40-minute introductory chat over a coffee, because basically we already had met, and we could do the, as I say, the sort of the basic intro theory online. And the final debrief as well also allowed me to limit the on-road time for the course to sort of 2 hours and a bit, depending on exactly how the roads worked for our trip out. And what that meant, of course, was I could cut out the need for a start point where we could get a coffee in the first place, but also that mid-ride break where we would need to take a rest from riding and get some food in. So all in all, that cut the time out on the road back quite significantly, but without affecting the content of the course. Now, in June, I duly reopened on the 1st, and I mildly rebranded the courses. I called my performance courses Ride for Fun, and I called the sort of urban riding courses Ride to Work. A few days later, Motorcycle Live was duly cancelled, not surprisingly. Police in Yorkshire announced that they were clamping down on illegal exhaust because they'd been even more annoying than usual during the quiet period of lockdown. And former Norton boss Stuart Garner was said to have acted dishonestly and recklessly by the pensions ombudsman. By mid-June, I'd already run several of these courses under the new format, and I was pretty pleased with the results. Some tweaks were needed, yes, but the feedback on the Zoom briefings and debriefings in particular was excellent. The DVSA pretty much went back to normal training and testing on the bikes by the 25th of June, after a bit of a lag while they got themselves organised. It makes you wonder what they were doing through April and May. But I decided I would stick with the new format. So that takes us to July. Now, through the month of July, COVID cases were low enough that there was at least a semblance of normality, unless you were trying to get a bike test. And here, trainers reported complete chaos with the booking system. They were flat out working on CBTs, but also desperately trying to get tests for those people who wanted a full license, particularly, of course, those who'd had courses or tests interrupted by the lockdown earlier in the year. I was reasonably busy with some on-road training, which was at least doing some of the repair job to the bank balance. But rather than track out to Stevenage, I had a new start point in Hertfordshire, just off the M1, M25 junction. Which is still pretty easy for everybody to get to, but also a little bit of a shorter journey for me. I was also working on a new series of short rider safety videos entitled 60-Second Safety, and they went up on YouTube and on Facebook too. In the news, Harley's announced new plans to rescue the company from financial difficulties, and one of their big steps forward was to announce a 338cc model. Yes, you heard that right, 338 cc's. And here's the interesting bit: it was due to be built in China. In Germany, thousands of bikers revolted over a proposed biking ban on Germany. This was brought in by the sort of some of the Christian fundamentalist councils from, I think, from the north of Germany mostly, but all over Germany, bikers basically went out and paralysed city centres in protest. And the transport minister actually agreed that it was not going to happen, which is good news for German bikers. In the UK, small bike sales surged as commuters bought scooters and 125 motorcycles. Bigger bike sales, not surprisingly, were less impressive. In Australia, learner rider numbers were up 20%. And a new ECE helmet law came in, which would basically is a new standard for helmets, and it will make bolt-on gadgets like intercoms and cameras illegal to fit to these newly certificated helmets. August. In the news, a New York e-scooter sharing scheme was put on hold after several fatalities. The scooters were supposed to be rented by people with prior two-wheeler experience, but it seems that wasn't checked properly, and there were people who'd never ridden basically a powered two-wheeler of any sort were renting these things and basically crashing them. The London Green Streets Initiative also began to hit the headlines for the wrong reasons, because as traffic built up, people discovered that a lot of roads had been narrowed, sometimes unnecessarily, people thought, and other roads had been closed to traffic altogether, which not only caused confusion for drivers, but was also interrupting sort of the emergency services and even causing disruption for taxi drivers and sort of delivery riders who were trying to find their way around. Sometimes the routes that were necessary to get into a block of streets were convoluted and much, much longer than the direct routes. And of course, the result was congestion built up on the main streets. Out in the States, the big bike show at Sturgis in South Dakota showed signs of becoming the COVID super spreader event that experts had feared. While Stevenage first introduced a cruise ban that made group rides illegal, and then under pressure removed bikes from the order, which was really aimed at stopping car cruises. And Simon Cowell fell off a new e-bike that wasn't the electric bicycle he thought it was and broke his back. In racing, KTM won their first MotoGP, which was a huge step forwards. We also got more detailed news of the proposed Isle of Wight Diamonds races. They were provisionally scheduled for late autumn 2020, but the news was that they were to be cancelled. With a debate over the suitability of the course and the weather at that time of year, plus objections from the residents anyway, whether we'll ever see these races go ahead, I suspect, is very debatable. August saw another one of my new ideas come to fruition. Following on from the success of my online briefings, I ran the first of my new online coaching sessions. It's an ideal that I've had sort of ticking away for a while, but I've never actually followed it up. I've had trainees travel surprising distances to take courses with me. Obviously, visitors from EU countries kind of would have found it easy to get here, but I've also had visitors from further afield, notably Canada, Namibia, Australia, and New Zealand. And I've also run courses myself in France, Luxembourg, and Portugal. But of course, many a time I've heard people say, I'd love to take one of your courses, but you're too far away. Well, with COVID-19 making people reluctant to travel even fairly short distances across the UK, it did seem time to launch the online training via a one-to-one Zoom meeting. To be fair, the courses haven't proven quite as popular as I'd hoped. As I said at the time when I was announcing these courses, most cyclists are funny creatures. We can be really early adopters of new technology. And at the same time, we can be real stick in the muds and very reluctant to change what we think we know works. So if that applies to you, don't be, come and look at my online training. In some ways, the most important part of these online sessions is that they are not just theory. What they include are straightforward, practical on-road exercises. And you can take those out onto the road and you can try them out for yourself. So you can take the theory from the presentation and then practice in real life. So if you're reluctant to do a course because you don't think you'll be able to do it on the road, don't be. Those practical exercises are what I've used for years, and they're just translated onto the screen, and then you practice yourself. What else in the news? Well, I basically took advantage of the low case numbers to visit some bereaved friends in Devon at the beginning of the month and pay some belated respects. I suspect that's something many of us will have had to do during the last year. A few days later, I wrote a post about a rider who'd overtaken us as we were driving back from Devon. We were on Dartmoor. He overtook us into a blind dip as we were on the way back. I could see why he'd done it. There was nothing coming down the road on the other side of the dip, but there was just a little blind area in the middle, and he committed himself into it without being able to see into it. What he also probably didn't spot was that about 20 meters behind him, as he started to climb up towards the crest, which he could see, several ponies trotted across the road, and we actually had to stop in the car. I mentioned that the bike involved was rather distinctive, and one of my former trainees, who just happens to live not very far away from where we were at the time, said that her husband, who'd been out riding his model of that machine, denied that it was him. So make of that what you will. Towards the end of August, I opened a new start point on the South Circular Road with a very carefully planned route, which actually allows us to get on some nice twisty roads in North Kent, actually surprisingly quickly to get out and do the Ride for Fun courses. So I hope this will be a popular start point when we're finally out of this crisis. I instantly picked up some bookings for out there, even though the long spell of dry, fine weather was finally coming to an end. So as we moved into September, the first thing that I commented on was a depressingly long list of fatal August bank holiday bike crashes. Riding may have been curtailed for many of us over 2020, but my news feed for much of the period, because there was nothing else to write about for most newspapers, was full of fatal and serious bike crashes. The death toll actually promises to be as grim as ever, even though our riding was curtailed. So you can draw your own conclusions from that. Financially stressed, Harley-Davidson cut most of their Euro range as it would be non-compliant with incoming emission regulations. And as part of their major restructuring plan, the new CEO ditched the further development of the only Harley I've actually liked the look of for years. Which is a shame, actually, but no, hey-ho. Zongshen also announced a 650 adventure bike, and that was built around the motor that they bought from Norton at the end of 2019. In England, the Western Supermare Beach Race was cancelled. Lower speed limits were announced for stretches of motorway with high pollution levels. And in Camden, in London, road narrowing barriers, which had been put in place to widen the pavements and allow social distancing on a stretch of road where, in fact, nobody actually very much walks, were mysteriously moved back overnight to widen the road again. Nobody quite knows who did it. And in the US, COVID outbreaks in 8 states were traced back to Harley riders who'd been to Sturgis. And of course, here in the UK, the COVID-19 update came in again. As case numbers began to rise, I had to issue another update saying that for the time being, I would be still training, confident that my precautions were keeping things as safe as possible. I also took the advantage of a window of fine weather to take off on the bike for a couple of days with Judy on the pillion, as I suspected this was probably going to be our last chance, only chance actually, for a biking trip for the year. We stayed in a small pub in the middle of nowhere near the Long Mynd in Shropshire in some self-contained accommodation. And we used the pleasant weather that we had to explore the Shropshire Hills, and also to head out across the Cambrian Hills of Mid Wales out towards Aberystwyth and the coast, and sort of around the reservoirs and the mountains. It was a good thing. It was good timing. A couple of days after we got back, the heavens opened. So by October, the fallout from Norton, the dust was finally beginning to settle on that, as it was revealed there would be enough money to pay back creditors. And the new TVS, the new owners, TVS Motors of India, also agreed to honour prepaid deposits on bikes and also to deliver machines that had been unsupplied. So they honoured those responsibilities in full, which is a good thing. Many companies that buy up businesses like that actually skip out on those responsibilities. Slightly less plausibly, The Guardian ran an article which praised Triumph as an example of British industry. It seems that the writer was unaware that almost all Triumphs are built in Thailand and Brazil, and Triumph have plans to ship out the last couple of models which are built in Britain, and so the UK will only be the research and development centre. Bit of good news, the Financial Conduct Authority reversed a big insurance merger by forcing Ardona to sell Bennett's just weeks after they'd acquired the company. The merger would have created basically an insurance giant controlling the vast majority of motorcycle insurance in the UK, and it was, not surprisingly, seen as anti-competitive. But nothing stopped the clothing giant Daisy buying up the boot manufacturer TCX. As the clocks went back, I switched the majority of my my motorcycle training regime to the winter one, where I only take bookings at short notice, and I also start sessions. Now I've got these shorter courses. I also decided to start them at 12 p.m. or 12 noon, and give the roads a chance to dry out a bit in the morning. And I felt that was a good way to extend my training deeper into the autumn. But it hardly mattered, because by the 5th of November, we were back in lockdown. This time, confusion reigned about the DVSA's to trainers, guidance to trainers. It had been fairly clear in the first lockdown what we were supposed to do, but this time round, the DVSA really muddled the waters. Initially, those statements said training schools must not go ahead with training or testing, and this time CBTs and tests for key workers were also included in the suspension, which left a lot of people in a bit of a problem as their CBTs ran out. But within a few days, this must not advice had been revised to should not, which of course opened the whole can of worms up on what does should not mean. Most of the next 4 weeks was actually spent trying to clarify the situation, with the DVSA ducking and diving, avoiding answering the question directly, whilst saying that it was the police's responsibility, but they'd look seriously at anybody who was actually convicted for breaking the lockdown rules. So what else? Kent was declared the most dangerous place in the UK to drive. Rishi Sunak was reported to be considering roads pricing, which of course would kill off any economy benefits from running electric cars and bikes. And Yamaha axed the long-running R6. But the only good news was the release of a new budget Trident from Triumph, which I suspect will be a huge sales hit, even though I think it's one of the ugliest bikes I've seen for a long time. And that brings us to December. After the 4-week lockdown that actually lasted 3 weeks and 6 days, if anybody counted, we very, very briefly came out of that lockdown, but the month started with more gloom as the 2021 TT was cancelled. FEMA concluded that loud pipes don't save lives. Camden announced plans for a huge increase in bike parking charges from nothing, basically, to over £6 an hour, to be phased in over a couple of years. And BMW were forced to recall clothing ranges due to contamination with toxic chemicals. The only good news was the remarkable plan in Cambridgeshire that actually encouraged the use of powered two-wheelers. Although I announced that I would run training courses through winter, of course, the lockdown we were plunged back into tier 3 very quickly indeed. So that shut down bike training here again. And I don't need to tell you, I'm sure, about the events just before Christmas. All I can say is at least I used the time productively over the final 2 months of 2020 when I was unable to do any training at all. Just a few days ago, I finally put up the last few posts from 2016 onto my coffee page, so they're now available to view. And given you've already got the complete Tips on Tuesday and Skills on Saturday collections from 2014 2015, that's 300 better biking articles to read all in one place. So 2021, where to now? Well, we talked yesterday of an even tougher Tier 5 being imposed. There's a government meeting about that going on this morning, or apparently there'll be an announcement this afternoon at some point. And aside from closing down schools and any business that's not deemed unnecessary, it's hard to see what else can be shut down. There's no immediate prospect of resuming on-road training here in London. So your support via my coffee page is actually invaluable. Just to remind you of the address, it is here. There we go, that should go up now. So as I said, I'll be 2014 to 2016 is up, and I'll start work on getting 2017 to 2020 up on there in due course. Of course, on the Facebook page here, you will still get my weekly Tips on Tuesday and Skills on Saturday series, and they will continue to be up here for now. Elevenses, I'll be running that on Wednesdays and Sundays as well. Hopefully get a few more visitors as we run through the year. And don't forget, you can also look into my online coaching sessions. If you are able to ride for recreation, you might as well use the time constructively if you can't go far. And the other thing that you can take a look at are my paperback books. Again, it's been keeping a trickle of cash coming into the bank as people have generously purchased these. So you can find those here. What else? As well as continuing Elevenses, I'll be scheduling some live presentations as well. I'm going to be locked down, as I say, for the foreseeable future, so I might as well do something positive with my time. And it looks like a lot of us will be restricted in our riding. So keep an eye open for dates for that. I'm also looking into the feasibility of running a mentoring scheme. I've talked about that in the Focus on Friday series, and I've got some interest on that, so keep an eye open for news on that. And last but not least, look out for a new newsletter. More details on that tomorrow. I'll just say good morning again to Nigel, who's said that he's not sure 2020 is a year that many of us will be looking back on. And Paul Varnsbury's also looked in with... he just says the Old Grey Whistle Test's pick of the year. It used to be a traditional must-watch program for him, and he says he'll have to add survival skills annual roundup. So excellent, thank you, Paul. Yeah, I might have to do this if we're here for much longer at the end of next year. Let's hope not. Right, okay. Well, with that, I think it's time to sign off, and definitely offer everybody very best wishes for a rather better 2021. Look after yourselves, everybody. Stay safe and enjoy the new year safely. Bye for now.